let's get started. So if everyone wants to come back on and we can get going. So hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our latest digital event. My name's Beth and I'm a marketing executive here at Burns Sheehan, as well as our diversity and inclusion champion. I'm really excited to be joined by 5 wonderful and passionate panelists today, who will be facilitating our discussion on how to foster a racially inclusive workplace culture. As a community, diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of our minds, and it's firmly a part of our business narrative here. Likewise, as a business, we know that it's also integral to our clients, as we are regularly having conversations on a daily basis around how we can move towards making the tech industry a more inclusive place, and how we can play our part in helping and advising our clients as they embark on their own journeys towards building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. With this in mind, we've introduced a series of events around diversity and inclusion called Diversity Talks. We're really proud to be kicking off that series with today's event, focusing on the challenges that racially diverse employees encounter in the workplace, and how businesses can recognise these challenges and implement change to make their cultures more inclusive. We hope that today is informative, and we aim to provide a number of practical initiatives and some tangible advice that can be taken away and used to begin fostering a more racially inclusive culture in your own organisation. There might be some difficult conversations had today, but we encourage everyone to be open and honest throughout this event, and know that this is a safe space to learn. We might make mistakes along the way, myself included, and we're all still learning, but this is a positive environment in which we can learn together and correct one another as we go. I'd like to encourage you all to get involved in the discussion and ask any questions that you have along the way. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please get involved and ask any questions that you have using the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen. All questions will be asked and answered anonymously, but we do ask you to be respectful of our panelists, and we won't tolerate any questions or discourse that is offensive in any way. Above all, I just want to say I hope that you enjoy this session and that you find it useful, and that you keep the conversation going after this event has finished. So I'd now like to hand over to the panelists and let them introduce themselves. April, did you want to start?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Beth, for that lovely intro, and thank you and the team for the amazing panel that you've brought together. I'm excited to speak with my fellow panelists. So before they introduce themselves, I'll introduce myself first. My name is April Williams. I'm the founder and CEO of Candid. Candid is an ED&I consultancy. So we work with tech startups and scale-ups to support them on their journey to nurturing an inclusive culture. For us, we use the word nurturing because we believe that every business has a culture, but it's about how do we nurture that culture to be more inclusive. So that's me, that's what I do. I'll pass on to the next panelists.
Hey guys, so I'm Tio. I currently work at Just Eat Takeaway. I've been there for 3 years now, and I'm a principal delivery manager. I'm part of our Women's Tech Network, FAME and STEM. And I'm also really excited to talk about this because yeah, we need to. So nice to meet you all.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessie. I'm a software engineer at CyberSafe, and I've been at CyberSafe for 3 years and have contributed to their ED&I strategy. I'm also part of the Coding Black Females team outside of that, which is a community for Black women in engineering, and I lead on community and partnerships at Black Valley.
Hey everyone, my name is Leke Shilwade. I'm the founder of Black Valley. Black Valley wants to increase the amount of Black talent working within the tech space and starting their own tech startups, and we run programs to facilitate that.
Hello everyone, my name is Kankemwai Shackle. Some people call me KK, or you can call me Kanke, and I currently work for a company called Adaptivist. I am the software engineering tech lead, and I've been at the company for, I think, about 3 years now. I'm very passionate about women in tech and also diversity in tech. And when I'm not like actively writing code and doing stuff at work, I really enjoy smart home automation, and that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys, for the great intros. So let's kind of kick off with the first question. So I guess, and April kind of began to touch on it in her intro, my first question is, why and how should businesses nurture diverse talent into senior positions? rather than hiring diversity into your business externally. Kay, I don't know if you wanted to start on that one. I know you had some things that you wanted to add.
Yeah, for this one, I think it's really important because something we've seen, or a trend we see in the industry, or something we've always heard, not necessarily in the tech industry, but in general, is something that, you know, people of color and minorities have been saying for a long time is, oh, I don't see someone like me. I don't see someone like me that looks like me, that sounds like me in certain positions. And it's become apparent that diversity is a bit lacking in tech. So not necessarily, obviously we're talking about racial diversity in this panel, but also things like gender diversity. So I think, especially in companies, it's very important for your diverse talents to be able to see that it is indeed possible for them to get to certain positions in the company, and that the company does support them to go into that position. One thing we find is that something that is quite common and well in in the Black community is people feeling like they can't aspire to certain roles, or they can't achieve certain roles because they don't have people in those roles, which is kind of strange, kind of like a nepotism thing. And I think that a way a company can break up that barrier is to encourage those talents. I also think that predominantly because certain sections or groups have been quite late to the game. So, for example, women working with STEM subjects, we also have minorities in that position. So it's very difficult to find, you know, I guess a Black person that is so senior and like an expert and doing, you know, big things compared to their counterparts. So I think it's fostering that talent and encouraging that talent, as opposed to going out and looking for that talent that is a minority or sometimes doesn't exist, right? So I think it's really important for the company to have that and to encourage that diverse talent, for them to build that internally as opposed to, you know, getting that externally.
Jessie, did you want to, I know you had some bits you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Kay said. It can be really easy for a company, if you focus too much on the metrics, just to focus on getting that number up of racially diverse people. And that tends to be biased towards entry-level roles, because as Kay said, it can be really hard to find people that are in that experience level that you would count as senior. So I think that's something that an organization can do in order to do their bit and increase that racial diversity throughout all levels of the company, is to encourage people that are a bit more junior to have that opportunity to prepare for a leadership role. So give them the opportunity to lead on projects, give them the opportunity to have access to a coach or a mentor. And I'm sure that we will touch on this later on, but one of the things that can cause the fatigue that leads to racially diverse people being more likely to leave the tech industry is the lack of being able to progress. So it's really important that you look at the reasons why somebody might, the reasons how you can get somebody to move into one of those more senior positions.
Brilliant. And is there anyone else wanted to add anything else to that question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
No, go on, Tia.
I just wanted to add really quickly, it really helps to foster that inclusive environment when you build it within. If you just hire people into certain positions, it doesn't actually prove or show that your company is inclusive. And actually what can happen is, as people come in, they become stagnant in those roles, because you can hire people in, but actually people can't move within the company because you don't have that inclusive culture. So if you can cultivate that internally, there's nothing wrong with bringing some external people in, of course not. But if you can nurture that internally, then really what you're building is you're building that inclusive culture within the organization. So that's like, I think that just is one of the positives to actually nurturing it as well. And then people that feel like they've been invested in as well, and they're able to grow in companies, feel more invested, and they actually give more, and they've experienced certain barriers, which when they get to certain positions, they can help to change that as well. Whereas when people come in, they don't have that experience, and those same barriers remain for people to move within the organization.
Yeah, 100%. I echo everything everyone's just said. just to add to it, when we talk about fostering an inclusive culture, sometimes businesses want to just focus on the diversity side of things. So it's like let's talk to recruitment agencies that can help us tap into a racial diverse pool. That's great, that's fine. But that's the later stage. The first stage actually for a business is to look at their processes and policies. When we look at tech startups, most of the time we have this idea that they're very entrepreneurial and everything just moves at 100 miles per hour, where there's no key focus on career succession planning. What does that look like within the business? So first of all, before we start thinking about how people can be in those roles from a diverse background, we need to look at what processes does the business have currently, and are they scalable? And are they scalable for everyone within their business? So not just people that fit in culturally, but it's people that are from all walks of life. So it's us reviewing how someone can move up within a business. That's where you see the barriers to seeing people of color in senior positions. If you are having metrics that typically support people that are privileged, then you're going to see people from a privileged background in senior positions. But if you actually look at your processes and go, actually, this is not as inclusive as it can be, then that's how you can reduce the barrier in order to see people from all walks of life be in those senior positions. So it starts from what you actually have as a process versus we're just going to parachute somebody in and tick our numbers.
Just to add to that as well, I think, again, really valid point made by everyone. I think it's really important because the senior positions are the decision makers and they set the tone around the culture of the organization. So to really influence and change that culture within organizations, we need to see ourselves and be represented at that top level. And the question asks, why as well, why that's important along that line, changing the culture and setting the tone so that everyone else could follow suit. And then the other point for me is how you could do it. I think we'll touch upon that later on, but just being an advocate for talents within the room. Most organizations, you need people to sponsor you. I'm sure we'll talk about that later on as well. You need people to make sure they are saying, amplifying, the competency of your work and what you're doing, so you can be given a fair chance to progress within the organization.
Brilliant, thank you guys. They're all really valid points. And kind of within that conversation when we spoke before, when thinking about how businesses can nurture diversity, one thing that we spoke about was equity and how do businesses, first of all, what does equity mean, and how can businesses take that into account when they're trying to nurture diverse talent up through the business. Tio, I know that you had some things you wanted to say about that. Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So actually April touched on it as well. So this is a really good segue. So equity is about recognizing the uniqueness of individuals and for companies to build that into their policies and into their processes. So earlier, April's talked about the importance of processes and actually reviewing those. So that's exactly what equity is. It's using your process, your policy in an organization to kind of address the balance for everybody. So it's looking at, when you're creating a policy, what's the barrier to entry for people? How inclusive is it? What kind of language are you using? Because there's things like that that can have a massive impact of people actually feeling comfortable even to be able to go for a promotion if the language is in a certain way, etc. So it's really looking at that. And the thing about equity as well is it's not something that's stagnant. It's something that you constantly need to readdress. And as you address, naturally you can't do everything for everyone at the same time. So as you create that policy and you write it, you may have missed addressing things for people. So you have to constantly reassess, reevaluate, is this working, and review those policies. So that's why it's super, super important that you have the people that are creating these policies are also from different backgrounds so that they can make those considerations when they create those policies. But it's absolutely key, right? Because policies, processes, procedures are things that really underpin and build a culture of a company. So if those aren't diverse and those aren't inclusive, then yeah, you're setting yourself up for failure really. So yeah, that's super important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tio. And April, did you want to add?
Yeah, just to add to what Tio said, I think, yeah, first of all, policies are really important. The how do business do it? How do business start? Leke touched upon this in terms of people in positions of power. I would add to that and say people in positions of power and influence need training in order to see how they can be implementing this on a day-to-day basis. So when we talk about training, we're talking about who are the people in your business that are having these conversations with your wider teams on a regular basis. That tends to be team leads, managers, etc. So when we're looking at it from a day-to-day perspective, one-to-ones, how are they managed? How are those conversations happening to ensure that we're allowing equity in how people work, or ensuring that we are making reasonable adjustments to ensure that someone can actually progress within the business. So it's about training your managers in order to be able to have these conversations and feel equipped that they're able to have these conversations on a day-to-day basis. In addition to that, when we're looking at how you can look at your policies on a regular basis, what I've done with many of my clients is introduce steering committees. And steering committees are done on a cohort basis. So every 6 months, that steering group is changed. And each steering group are focused on a particular aspect of the business when they're thinking about how they're going to nurture an inclusive culture for them. So sometimes it may be looking at their onboarding and offboarding processes, right? So you'll have a team of 10 people across the business. So you'll have an exec sponsor, and an exec sponsor is really important to be part of those steering groups because that ensures that that conversation is still happening on a leadership level, as well as having various people from the business and different departments as well. So it's making sure that it doesn't become a HR-centric initiative, that it's now a wider business initiative, that you're having these conversations on a regular basis and always reviewing, like Taiwo said, it's a progressive thing, right? So by having those steering groups, you're allowing your teams to feed back on what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what do we need to improve to ensure that we're always thinking about how inclusive we can be. And then also having support for your line managers to ensure that they are also equipped to be having these conversations, that these conversations don't fall by the wayside. So that's what I'll add to what Tio said.
Brilliant, thank you, April. And Leke, did you want to add?
Yeah, sure. I think both Tio and April made some really good points around that. What I wanted to add is this point around training and why that's important. I think lack of understanding of what equity looks like or what it is can make you feel like it's unfair, especially if you're not the group that is directly affecting. So it's important for organizations to make sure there's a clear communication on why it's been done. And like I said, Tio did a brilliant explanation of it. And to me, equity is about leveling the playing field. We're not saying, we're creating more access for a particular group of people. We're saying we're making sure they have similar access to their counterparts. That's simply it. And we're putting this in place to make sure that's in place. Alongside that is then making sure you carry people along within the organization to make sure they don't feel like they are being unfairly treated. Because at the same time, we don't want others to feel like there's opportunities being created and they're the outsiders that's not eligible for those opportunities.
Leke, when we were speaking before, you gave a really good kind of like analogy or like a metaphor for what equity was. Would you mind sharing it?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really difficult one to describe without showing the picture. But essentially, when people think about equality and equity, equality is about giving everyone the same access. So no matter, like, let's say you're trying to look over a fence, no matter how tall or how short you are, you're given the same pole to stand on. But equity takes into account your how tall you are and give you a level pole to make sure you could see over the same barriers that's stopping you from accessing whatever opportunities in front of you. Hopefully that like paints that picture.
No, it does. Thank you. Brilliant. So kind of moving on, but still on the same sort of topic, what other things could businesses be considering, or should they start considering when nurturing an inclusive culture? So what other ideas or things should they take into account? Kay, did you want to start with this one?
Yeah, so I think for years now, something we know within, for marginalized or minority groups working in the workplaces, things like, obviously we mentioned before, them not seeing people like them in top positions, or people like that look like them not being promoted. We've also heard of people not feeling like they can bring their authentic self to work, right? That's I think, especially with Black people, that's a common thing of, oh, I can't wear my hair like this. I can't dress like this. I can't speak like this, right? And there's also that aspect of you being too sensitive when people, I think this happens when they call you aggressive as a Black woman, right? And you're like, no, that is unacceptable. And they're like, no, they didn't mean it that way. You're just being too sensitive, right? So we've had all these microaggressions that have existed in the workplace. But something interesting happened when the George Floyd thing happened and we had the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So I think from that movement, Breonna Taylor and everything going on with the pandemic, a phrase was coined, Black fatigue. And I think I'll leave that to my other panelists to kind of, touch more on what that means and how that feels like, because I think they were going to do a great job. But essentially, Black fatigue happens when you give, I guess, in this case, the Black people in the organization permission to now express themselves, right? So you expect the Black people to tell you how to be and what to do. One thing we had during that Black Lives Matter movement is we had a panel in the office. I mean, in my mind, I feel like is progress made, but that for me was a classic example of Black fatigue, right? Because they expected the Black people in the company to kind of tell them stuff we've been feeling for years, the microaggressions we've been facing and the racial experiences we've had with friends, families, and just our circle and professionally. So that was a lot. We had like a Slack channel where people dropped their questions and stuff like that. I mean, I like to see the positive in things, and that was definitely a first step. But we got questions like, what should I do with my white guilt? So don't know how to answer that question, but that kind of gives you an idea of, these sort of things that happen. So for me personally, giving that, it made obviously me think about, what personally I would like to see change, and I feel like what a company can do to minimize not only things like, Black fatigue, but kind of have that conversation. So I think the first step is to acknowledge the emotional toll of racism, like, being vocal about, supporting your, minority, diverse talents, that some of these things are not in their heads. And these are repeated experiences that you acknowledge and you support. I think another thing that is important that came out from our panel discussion is, before you as a company decide to embark on conversations about race, I think it's very important to assess your readiness, because it's one thing to say, oh, have a panel and speak about it, and it's one thing to actually make the changes suggested by the panel, or implement what has been discussed. So I think there shouldn't be almost like a show, right? Oh, let's have a panel, or let's have a topic, or let's talk about race, and there's no follow-up. So I think it's extremely important to assess that readiness and get the right people involved. So it has to be a psychological space as well, a safe space, so people feel like they can express themselves. Another thing I think companies do, I don't think my company has done this, as well, auditing, right? And I think a lot of my friends echoed that, especially after that whole George Floyd thing of, oh, let's, do a, some kind of audit for our inclusivity and diversity in the company. But what tends to happen is there is no follow-up, right? There's no action, especially by the top leaders in the organization. It kind of stops with HR. So I think one of the things that I would like to see companies do is for their leaders to be held accountable, right? It doesn't have to start and end in HR, you know. I think another thing that would be useful is, although I don't know how this is, for me, I think holding sessions for people of color, right? Like, we did this recently in my, not necessarily sessions. So in terms of sessions, I mean like help, you know, on a regular basis, so that like employees of these groups or Black employees can provide feedback, right, on their experiences working in the company. I think that would be very valuable. And also actually believing what you hear from them. So not saying, oh, you're being sensitive. No, it's all in your head, you know, actually believing, you know, not trying to defend or rationalize. And yeah, I think continue to listen, empathize, and yeah, continue to educate, right? Something we did in my company over the summer was, I can't remember the name of the thing, but it was like a series of events every Thursdays and Fridays that we would have in the company. And it was a mix of, you know, doing fun activities and team bonding. But then what we always did was we'll start with a very serious topic, move to something funny. So we covered topics like mental health in men, and we talked about anti-Asian racism, right? I think you can have these kind of conversations in a not so, you know, I guess in your face kind of way, where you get the entire company involved and educated, but then at the same time it's like, I guess, not in a way that people are like, oh no, defensive and stuff. So I think that's how, you know, companies can help have this inclusive workforce.
Brilliant, thank you, Kay. And April, did you want to add anything?
I mean, Kay has touched on everything that I would want to. So that you can't add to what Kay is saying, right? I can only talk from my experience and the experience I have with my clients. And there's so many points that I completely echo with Kay. When you're thinking about having a conversation and you're thinking about how do I nurture an inclusive culture, absolutely thinking about your readiness. There's so many times I've had conversations with clients. This month in particular has been a busy month because it's Black History Month and businesses go, right, we should be doing something about ED&I, right? Post George Floyd, there was a peak. I did a post on LinkedIn and it got over about 200,000 likes. I literally woke up that morning and I was tired. I literally said, I'm done. I'm done and I'm tired of businesses using Black Lives Matter as a PR stunt. Because at that point, it was a PR stunt, right? I'm a Black middle-aged woman. I will always be a Black woman. That will not change, right? Businesses, their, I guess, journey will change. What is a priority to them will change. The moment they get an investment, that's it, ED&I falls down by the wayside. If they have ER issues going on, ED&I falls by the wayside. Because one thing, D&I, for most businesses, sit under HR. It's not a HR initiative. If a business has their ED&I sitting under HR, it needs to be reconsidered, 100%. Reason being is that it's not just a people thing, it's a business thing. And if you're really serious about having ED&I as how your business functions and it's part of your values, it needs to be considered on a wider level. It needs other people, part of the business, being part of those conversations, not just HR sending out an email saying, we're celebrating Black History Month and we're going to get a speaker that's going to talk about X. That's just not enough. Right? The second thing, in order to make sure that your journey is starting the best way possible, is to invest or seek expert advice about it. Because when we're talking about building an environment of psychological safety, it is important that you have people who are part of your committee or who are part of your strategy or whatever you want to call it, that knows and understands how to have these conversations. Because what we're dealing with is everyone in the business are at different starting points. It's like a change management project. If a business was going to do a change management project, they will bring a change management consultant. That's what they would do, because they would be like, we have never scaled before. So we need someone who's worked with X company and has scaled to come and help us get to where we need to be. That's great. When we talk about ED&I, we say, oh, HR can do it as part of their day-to-day job. No. You need to assess where you are as a business, your readiness to be part of that journey, and the journey cannot have an end date. So businesses that say by 2023, we're going to have X amount of people in senior positions who are from a BAME community. What happens once you hit that target? Does that mean you were done? No. Your journey shouldn't be done by 2023 or 2024 when you've hit your goals and you've reached out to recruitment agencies that can get you people of color to sit on your boards, right? You need to be thinking about, how do we ensure this conversation is happening on a continual basis? So by having someone that can support you in building that environmental psychological safety, not only for your Black employees, but for everybody else, right? That's where you can start to say, right, we're at our discovery phase. And I like to use the word phases, not times or, dates or whatever, because we're dealing with people's emotions and mental health and also their lived experiences. That can take some time. What you can also do there, as Kay said, is run audits. And that's where you start to see where you are in your journey and what are the things that you need to make as a priority in terms of, this is a discussion that we need to have right now because this aligns with our business goals and we see this is impacting our people that are going to deliver on our business goals, right? That's how you can start to, if you like to say, quantify what you are trying to do. But in order to start your journey, you need to make sure you have the right experts in order to have this conversation. If you were sick, you wouldn't go to somebody who's not a doctor to help you. So if you're looking to make changes around nurturing inclusive culture, speak to somebody on how you can start that journey and what are the things you need to consider. That's me before I go on another rant.
Brilliant, thank you, April. And did anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I think, both Kay and April went into a lot of details, and I'm sure everyone in the room could take a lot of things from that. I don't think I'm going to drop any new insight, but I just want to emphasize some things. I think it's a really great point that April made around the business case for EDI. And the main thing, there's a report did by McKinsey that, business that's more diverse is 33% more likely to perform better than the counterpart. So there's a business case in that. You have the diversity of thoughts to put into your product or whatever service you're creating to serve the community that you're meant to be representing better. There's that business use case for that. It gives you a competitive edge, essentially. So this is not just a good thing to do. It's a business case for getting involved with it. The other thing I want to touch on, I think, like both speakers earlier said, is an holistic approach. There's no one size fits all or one thing. I think that's where business falls short. Like a business will do one thing, like they'll get a speaker in or they'll post a job board to a community and they feel like they've done, they've now done the diversity and inclusion for the year or approach sort of thing. But I think you have to look at it from a more holistic approach. And for me, there's probably like 3/4 areas that I think, every business or advice to businesses in this room need to look like. One is around your recruitment strategy. I think we've touched about it already. So what is the current recruitment strategy? How do you get people in? How do you recruit? How do you attract new talent? And just looking at that a bit more holistically as well. Again, looking at your employee development, I think that's been mentioned already. This is key, like what things are in place around that. The other one is around inclusive company culture. How can you ensure people working in your place can bring their own self to work? And then lastly, a bit of a soft one, but actually a really important one, like what you're producing is inclusive as well. So whether you're a company that's producing like technology products, are there any biases being built in that product? And to me, that's very important as well. So your services, how are you relating to your clients? So all those put together is like key, right? And as you can see, like if you allow that to just fall on one person or a group of people within the organization, that's where Black fatigue comes into place. Like it's not a case of one person should fix this for you. And as part of their role, yes, we could have all these, groups, employee resources group as they're called, to drive the conversation and shape the culture, but it shouldn't just fall on them.
Brilliant, thank you, Leke. And Jessie, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just on top of what everybody else has said, I think making sure that, and I'm sure we're going to touch on this later with the Black fatigue as well, but just making sure that you are, as a business, facilitating those safe spaces and groups for people. So support and sponsor employee resource groups. I think we had a comment in there earlier about having groups that you are both providing for and facilitating so that people have a safe space to discuss and provide feedback. You're not going to get the honest, what do you think of our culture in a once a year survey. You're going to get that through people being able to be honest with each other and, come together to collaborate on what kind of feedback and what they'd like to see from a company. So I think making sure that the racially diverse people within your company have that space. There are places they can vent, there are places they can feel supported and be themselves as well. Yeah, that's all from me.
Brilliant, thanks, Jessie. And I mean, within what everyone's just spoken about, there have been some really great examples of behaviours and initiatives that businesses can introduce in order to not overburden their racially diverse colleagues. But one thing that we spoke about in kind of the sessions leading up to this event was the concept of allyship. And I know that Leke, you had some really great insights and ideas around that. So I don't know if you wanted to share anything.
Yeah, sure. I personally feel like allyship is important. But there is I know it can be a case of what defines an allyship. I think you don't get to call yourself an ally. The community that you're helping are the in-crowd that decide whether you're an ally to them. And that's not transferable. And it's not a one-off thing. It needs to be a continuous process. Allyship is something that we rely on heavily at Black Valley. So most of our mentors, as we call them, are from a diverse background, and they specifically are supporting Black talents. And it's important for me to have the conversation with them before they join our community, to understand their background and to understand like they really understand the issue and to really understand their why for wanting to make a difference. So I think my learnings from working with our amazing mentors is there are people out there that genuinely care. And I'm sure within your companies and with your organizations, there are people that genuinely care. What are you doing for these people to allow them to make the difference that they want to make? I think, it's something that organization could come, and that's where allyship come into place, really. How can you be a voice for the underrepresented? How can you champion people within a space that you find yourself and you feel like everyone else looks like me? How can I champion other groups, especially for the sake of this conversation, the Black community to be represented in this room? Excuse me. In some case, there are tech roles that you need to refer people to the job. So how can you refer people that doesn't look like you, or people that are not within your immediate community? It's like there's single steps, single things, and we'll probably touch on it a bit more later on. I think mentoring is a key one, and so is sponsorship, and I'm sure we'll go a bit more around that.
Brilliant, thank you. And April, I know that you also spoke about allyship, and was there anything else that you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I think both Jessie and Leke touched upon it really well. I think the only thing that I would add to that is that allyship is a journey, as Edie and I is for everyone else. And I think it's something that if you have made a decision that you want to embark on that journey, it's being open to learn and unlearn what you know already. Right? And what you do for one community at one given time, it's not doing a copy and paste exercise and say, well, I did this for this person who identifies with this community and it worked there, so off I go to do the same thing. This is where the unlearn piece comes into play, and being willing and open to listen, and also be okay if you make mistakes, right? Because in this journey, you are going to make mistakes. and not be too hard on yourself. But if you're open to learn and you're open to feedback, that would help you on your journey to say, right, okay, this is where I probably hadn't considered. And it's not a case that you're wrong person, you're a bad person, sorry, but it's a case of that probably wasn't on your radar. So it's a learning journey. You're learning, you're unlearning, you're learning, you're relearning. So that's the only thing that I'll add to that.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kay, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, kind of taking a pivot from the allyship. I think one way that, or a few ways that a company cannot overburden their racially diverse talent is doing their own learning, right? So encouraging themselves and the people in the company to do their learning and not expect the diverse talent to be your teacher, because it does compound on the emotional toll. So I think having, in as much as there is a positive reason for having, things like panel discussions and stuff, I think it's also important to recognize that, it's not our job. I think another thing they can do to not overburden a racially diverse talent is commit to being transparent. Whatever audit or whatever, I don't know, polls that you're doing in the company in terms of inclusivity and diversity, I think that it's very important that these things are quite transparent so that the organization, most importantly, the colleagues leaders can hold themselves accountable about, what's happening and stuff like that. And I think I kind of mentioned it in the previous one, being obviously learning and empathizing and actually believing what people say, what your diverse talent is saying, and not thinking that, trying to sugarcoat things or defend. I think really listening and trying to solve that problem helps with, us not feeling like, oh, we have to carry this all by ourselves, or we have to go in a corner or create like a Slack group or a WhatsApp group outside the company to just chat about how this colleague did this and it was kind of racist, but then HR was like, oh no, it's fine, she didn't mean it that way, or he didn't mean it that way. So I think, actively listening and making changes would help.
Brilliant, thank you, Kay. So kind of just moving on to the next question, I realised that a few of the questions that we've already had sent through and a few questions that we had sent into us before kind of touched upon this point. And one question I wanted to ask was, how can businesses start conversations about diversity and inclusion authentically? And I know, April, this was something that me and you spoke about one of our first calls. So I don't know if you wanted to kickstart.
Yeah, so this is what Candid does. We have honest conversations, right? We address the elephant in the room. So we don't sugarcoat what we do. So sometimes we can be a bit full on, but in order to have that authentic conversation, what me and my team do is ask the business why. Why are you at this particular point in time wanting to have a conversation about how you nurture inclusion or a sense of belonging within your business? And from that why, we take that and what we say is, right, this is what the leadership team are saying. This is their why. This is the corporate why, right? Businesses, before you embark on trying to get a workshop in play to talk about unconscious bias or allyship or any type of workshop that you're thinking that would help start the conversation, it's starting with that why piece. So for us, what we do is once we have that conversation with leadership, we run focus groups with the wider business to understand, is what the leader's saying and what the wider business is saying are aligned. If they're aligned, that's great. Most of the time they're not. And that's where we start to work on that perception gap of saying, actually, this is the reason why we need to nurture an inclusive culture within the business. And then from that, you're able to say, right, now we know our true why. Now we can start to work around how we have this conversation. For some businesses, it's purely discovery, and it can be in form of workshops, it can be panel discussions like this, it can be a lunch and learn that they decide to do. But I really do urge people to start with that why piece and have conversations across the business, and focus groups really help with that. And by having external people run those focus groups, what I have found is that the content that comes from those focus groups, CEOs say to me all the time, it's sobering to read, because they didn't realize that these are the kind of things that their business truly feel. And that's where we're able to break that barrier and say that now we know how everyone feels within the business. Now we're able to really make tangible next steps. And it's really important for businesses as well, not to stay in that talking phase too much. And if you're in that talking phase, make sure you have a really robust comms strategy on how you're feeding back to the business on a regular basis, on the conversations that you're having, on how those conversations are impacting any strategy that's coming forward. Because what tends to happen, and this is where all my fellow panelists have mentioned, is that psychological safety. You're having these conversations and it's no one knows where their conversations is going. It's not building trust. It's not building a clear picture. It's not transparent. So that common strategy around, okay, we've had this conversation. This is where we're at right now. This is how it's going to impact our business. These are ideas that we're having about the tangible next steps. It really brings everyone on the journey with you. So really start with that why piece. And once you've got that why piece, then you're able to say, let's make those tangible steps together.
Brilliant, thank you, April. I'm just looking at the time, and I know that we've got quite a lot of questions that have come through, so I just wanted to move on to our last question before we move on to the Q&A. And it's something that we have kind of touched upon. It's come up a few times already. So my question is, how can sponsorship and mentorship help to nurture diversity within businesses? And Tio, I know that this was something that you spoke about briefly at the beginning, so I don't know if you wanted to kind of talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. So firstly, it's so important. It is so important. So I encourage people of all backgrounds, to be honest, to be mentors, to sign up to be those, because it not only, normally a mentee seeks out a mentor. This isn't always the case, but generally that's what happens. And you choose someone who's more experienced. You've got a bit more of a clearer goal of what you're trying to achieve. It's about learning, you know, practical, more tangible sharing that happens within a mentor-mentorship relationship. But there's so much learning that can happen from both people. So actually, I just encourage people to get involved. It's really important for people from minority groups to be mentors. It's really important for people to feel like they can identify with their mentors. But equally, I say that, and I also say this, is that if you're not from one of those backgrounds, you may feel, I'm not quite sure if I can mentor somebody because I'm not sure, you know, for whatever reason. But actually there's so much that you can learn too, and that you, as you learn and as you share, you can take that into how you maybe change your perspective and your way of thinking. So it's super important. I want to separate mentorship and sponsorship though a little bit though, because mentorship tends to be more of a conscious decision that people make, and sponsorship tends to be more subconscious, unconscious. And sponsorship means like an advocate, an ally, someone who champions you in the room. They're normally decision makers, they're normally senior leaders, they normally have quite a lot of influence. And what tends to happen is, because sponsorship, it's you know, it's something that somebody chooses to sponsor somebody. It's rarely, can you be my sponsor and can you be at the seat at the table, you know, sponsor me. You know, that doesn't really happen. So what tends to happen is, as people, we gravitate towards people that are like us, people who think like that, or people who have had similar experiences. So my ask really is for anyone on this call is to check your biases when you're sponsoring people, when you are at that decision-making table, when you are thinking about who you're going to give opportunities to. Ask yourself why, because generally you'll find that, yeah, potentially giving those opportunities to people that look like you, that act like you, that sound like you, that you relate with. And what tends to happen, people from minority backgrounds, because there's that lack of presence in leadership, tend to get overlooked for development opportunities, for promotions. and have less sponsorship in organizations. And by no means, for most people, is this actually conscious and deliberate. But because sponsorship tends to be something that's really unconscious, it's really, really important. Yeah, it's just super important. I can't stress it enough. And the two things, mentorship, sponsorship, super key. But my ask is just check your biases. When you are sponsoring, when you're advocating for somebody, ask yourself why. Also challenge yourself to sponsor somebody who maybe it doesn't come so naturally to you, but that potential, that opportunity, again, it comes equity, redressing balance. You know, there's some people that have potentially gone to schools where they do public speaking and it's a norm. So you tend to give them the presentations and you tend to give them those opportunities. And actually, there's somebody there that could be amazing at public speaking, but they haven't had those opportunities. So when advocating for people, it would be great, and sponsoring people, to just check why you're doing it and try and find opportunities where you can do it for people that it may not necessarily come so naturally to you. I'll stop there, but as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. And everyone can be a sponsor for somebody else, even if you're just one level up, you know, like all of us can be, but it tends to be unconscious, and people in more senior positions can have a higher impact on the trajectory of someone's career. So yeah, senior leaders, please think about.
Yeah, thank you, Tia. And Leke, did you want to kind of talk about mentorship? Because I know that's a big part of what you do at Black Valley.
Yeah. Again, I think Tia covered most of the points, and I probably don't have that much to add, but just kind of from a Black Valley point of view, like that's kind of like the key thing we're set up for. And it's around this idea of like social capital, you know, making sure we have the same opportunity and access to opportunity as our white counterparts. And that's where mentoring comes into place. And there are things that you're not aware of, or within your role, or when it comes to applying for jobs. I think one thing that we're starting to learn within our community, and most of our mentors will say this, especially they're not from a Black community, there's certain roles that they will freely apply for and, you know, feel confident of getting those roles. And it's trying to share the same knowledge of why they feel they should get those roles, and, you know, feel it like sharing their learnings and things like that. And that comes through very well within mentorship, and directly that hopefully leads to more people within the community getting access to when those roles become available, knowing, because they do have the skill sets, knowing how to put themselves as a better candidate to get those roles.
Brilliant, thank you, Leke. I'm just conscious of the time, so we're going to move on to the Q&A now, but I know that it's almost 1 o'clock and I didn't want to interrupt any of the other questions, as there's been so many great points shared today. But just to the panelists, if any of you do need to drop off at any point, please do, but if you're able to stay on longer and answer a few more questions, that would be great. We did have a few questions that were submitted to us beforehand, so I might start with one of those. So one question was, do you have any advice for newer organizations on how to start the conversation around diversity and inclusion? I know both April and Kay, you were both interested in answering that question, so I don't know if either of you wanted to give it a go.
I can start if that's okay, April. I think in terms of like new organizations, I think something that worked well for us is, like I said, like incorporating it into like company events. So we had like the Summer SOS. I think that's what the name I was trying to remember, and it was just like a company-wide team bonding thing where we would have like, you know, serious conversations and then followed by, you know, something fun like Taskmaster or pet shows, like where pets would like dress up in costumes, and then it was really fun. But stuff like that, I think just to kind of get that in where it's not really in your face. I think that's a great way where, you know, you have conversations, you bring people that are that talk about diversity and inclusion, and you educate people that way. And I think that's a good way to start conversation. And I think something I touched on earlier is like, you know, encouraging feedback sessions. Those sessions can be anonymous, but, you know, so that you can hear from you know, the minority diverse talents in the company. They can share their feedback about the experience in the company and how you can make that a better place for them. So I think those things are relatively kind of easy to start and maybe cheaper to start, and then for new organizations, and then I guess that's where people like April come in.
Okay, in fact, I come in quite early on in the processes as well. I think in terms of starting that conversation, the first advice I'd give to any business that's starting, don't try and do everything at once. Don't run before you can walk. Really start that discovery phase and really nail down your why you want to do this. And that can be some hard-hitting conversations, but in order to make sure you're having a greater impact, a couple of tangible advice: make sure you create the space, you create the time, so it's not at the bottom of your agenda, at the bottom of any of your leadership meetings. Make sure that's at the top so you have time to have that conversation. And also, don't be too hard on yourself. It's going to be a long ride, so don't be too hard on yourself, and don't pressure yourself to have certain numbers in play and a really robust strategy in place that you must adhere to, right? The ED&I roadmap or strategy, or however you refer to it internally, should be a progressive strategy. It should be open enough and flexible enough for you to change and pivot based on the feedback that you receive, like Kay mentioned, making sure you're having that comm strategy in place as well. Who's going to be the person that is able to facilitate conversations or be able to signpost people to have those conversations? Those are the important bits if you're really trying to start this conversation. If you do those couple of things, I truly believe that you would build a really good foundation to have those conversations and incorporate everything that myself and my fellow panelists have said today.
Thank you. And Jessie, did you want to add as well?
Yeah, so coming from the startup space, I think that something that CybSafe have done really well is the candidness that leadership have demonstrated. I think that it's been fantastic to kind of foster that environment where it's safe to admit your mistakes, safe to admit that you're still in progress and that you don't have to get everything right. But it also means that people feel more comfortable in being able to call out things that need to be addressed. There's not the kind of shame in having to speak to somebody about a mistake that they've made, because we're all trying to learn and we're all doing it for the benefit of everybody. We all want to help each other get better at this. And it's really to do with the greater mission than ourselves of like being able to contribute to a fairer society. And I think that if you have that demonstrated from leadership all the time, that's something that has been really powerful in terms of creating a really good culture. I think as well, it's been mentioned a few times, but it being a continuous journey and making sure that you are giving the opportunity. Like we have regular updates and we celebrate our wins in terms of initiatives we're part of, but we also have review periods where everybody in the business is able to contribute to what we've said our goals are or what we're aiming to do. And it means that we're able to hold ourselves accountable, but also make adjustments where maybe we weren't ambitious enough, maybe there's more we could do. And it's that constant feedback loop that we're looking for. Are we doing enough? How can we do it so that it's more effective? And making sure that everybody feels welcome to contribute regardless of where they come from. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Jessie. I know that we're now just past 1 o'clock, so if any of the panelists need to leave, please do so. Is anyone able to stay on maybe for another 5 or 10 minutes? I know we've got a few more questions and we can go through, but yeah, if anyone needs to drop off now, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us. So one of the other questions that we've had come through, which I think, Tio, I know that you would quite like to answer. So the question is, I've never been a fan of having exclusive conversations with employees of a particular ethnic group because that could potentially feel awkward. Do you think there is a hindrance in not exclusively having conversations with, say, Black employees or Asian employees, for example?
Yeah, so Definitely. And I think this has been part of the problem, is we're worried about that awkwardness or uncomfortableness. And we have to push past that, because without those conversations, we miss out on the learning, we miss out on the unlearning, and it doesn't allow that authentic sharing of information. How will people know how people feel if we don't have that conversation? It shouldn't exclusively be we're only going to talk to these people, but absolutely we need to understand how these people feel. In this case, the person referred to Black or Asian people. You absolutely need to have that conversation, and the more awkward it is, actually you'll tend to find there's more opportunity for change, for growth, for learning. So yeah, I would say don't shy away from uncomfortableness and from awkwardness, because it's necessary for growth, and it's real. Right? If people are having these real life experiences that are awkward, why should they feel that way? And why should they constantly feel awkward? And I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not sure who that question came from, but it sounded like it did come from someone who's potentially Black or Asian. This is sometimes where we feel like imposters potentially, and feel like we don't want to be the problem. And it's natural to feel that way. I don't want it to just be about me because that's awkward. Well, that is true, but there is a problem here. There's no secret that things need to change. So if we don't speak up, or you don't speak up, then actually what opportunity do people have to learn from that? You know, so I think don't worry about the awkwardness. That is perfectly normal. We need to push past that, and we need to have those conversations.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that question? Or if not, I can move on to the next one. We did get a question for Jessie. So it says, Jessie, how do you approach employee contributions in your DEI reviews?
So I'm not sure if this question's asking how to approach getting contributions or how to approach the contributions themselves. But in terms of getting the contributions, we have a document that everybody is able to access at any point. You've got there's a part of it which is like a Kanban board. You can see our progress with each of the things we're committed to. And one of the first swim lanes is add your suggestion. And anybody is welcome to contribute to that at any point. And it's not necessarily, I think what we tried to do in the beginning was trying to get everybody in one room at the same time to come up with ideas. And we realized that under that kind of pressure, it can be very difficult for people to feel like they're honest and to have the time and space to formulate a suggestion. So we found that giving, maybe a deadline a few weeks ahead for us to review those suggestions means that people can kind of contribute to it in their own time and really put thought into what those contributions might be. And then if the question is asking about how we speak about them, again, we just have candid conversations. If there's something that's not quite clear, if there's something that we see is being raised a few times, it's great to have the conversation about what the contribution is and how we can really make sure that we're addressing that thing with the people. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Jessie. We've had quite a few questions come through, but I think what would be good if I'll ask one more question, and then any of the questions that have been asked today, I will send over to the panelists. And of course, we'll be doing a blog and a write-up afterwards. So if there's any questions that don't get answered, I will make sure to put to the panelists. So one last question, which I guess is kind of come up a lot today, but it would just be great if there was any other bits that anyone wanted to add. Within your organizations, or what are you doing to create a diverse and inclusive workforce that you would recommend to others? I mean, one question that we were going to touch on today was, we were kind of running out of time, was sometimes initiatives don't always go well, but sometimes they really do. So is there anything in particular that you would recommend?
One thing I started doing, so I don't know if it's like an organization thing, but it's definitely a theme thing that I do with my manager, is I recognize that I have an unconscious bias in terms of women. So every time I see women applying for engineering roles, I get super excited. You know, I see their CVs and I get that technical test and I'm like, oh my God, I want a woman to win. And I recognize this about myself. So when we were hiring and recruiting for some of the engineering roles we had, something I discussed with my manager that we did in my previous company was strip out their names and ask them to explicitly not add any kind of name or anything that can identify them. And then we take that test and we assign it to a random person to review, so that they don't know if that person is female, male, black, white, Asian. There isn't that, and they can just focus on the quality of the work. So it's probably something I should share with the wider business, but I think that really, really works and that helped. So in as much as it started from like a gender bias, I think you can have that with diversity in general, because people's name kind of gives away where they're from or their race and stuff like that. Another thing is, like, I try and recommend, so something I found, it's a tool that does essentially what I just said. I think it's called Be Applied, and what it does is it helps de-bias recruitment. So if you're thinking of hiring in your company, it kind of just gives like a random number and strips out every other information of the candidate, which is really helpful. And when I found that, I just sent it to the recruitment team in my company and said, oh, this is really good. And they said, oh, we're already looking at that. So I think anything you kind of, for me, if I find anything, I just always, recommend to the company. So I think that would really help. And also something we touched on in the beginning, about fostering the diverse talent to senior positions, because I mean, the only people that understand the experience is the people that have been through it, and you want those people that have been through it to also be in influential positions where they can, call out things and influence things. So I think that's also something I think I would highly recommend. So, if you have people that can effect change, diverse leadership or influential top level management, then, that's something that's worked in Adaptavist and something I would definitely recommend.
Brilliant, thank you, Kay. Tia or Jessie, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So change starts with ourselves. So ultimately, we need to get involved and be part of the conversations, be part of the solutions, especially as people from diverse backgrounds. We know how we feel, we know what would help us. So that's one thing I'd say as an individual, is that I'm really keen on getting involved in any internal conversations or activities that are happening, because I want my voice to be heard and I want change to be made. So as an individual, that's what I do. But as a company, what we've recently done, just touching on Black fatigue, during the BLM, we had this Jet versus Racism Day, which was super successful. We had external people coming in, internal panels, and a whole day of just talking about the Black Lives Matter, the impact that it has, and trying to create cultural change. However, there was a group of people in the background who organized it and who were involved in trying to make this happen. And they were emotionally drained by the end of this. And everyone else was super energized because they've just been educated. They're like, what can we do? And they were done. They were finished. They were tired. And they needed, some support. So what's recently happened, on top of that, they were doing their day job. And the expectation was they still need to perform in their day job. And just recently, there's actually a policy being written for ERG groups, for you to have 4 hours a week. Obviously, it needs to be signed off by your manager, but it's going to be formalized, like it's a formalized role if you're a chair or if you're a member, so that you're actually able to do this, and the time is carved out, and the business are actually saying, yes, you can do this and get paid to do part of this, because they recognize the importance of it. So I think that's super important as well, is that for companies to support that activity and to give people the space to get involved in that as well. So yeah, that's one thing that has been awesome.
Tia, that sounds so good. I love the idea of that, and having time to like really nurture an ERG. I think that's definitely something I'm going to be taking away from this. Just to add to that quickly, is like, at CybSafe, something that I've really taken advantage of for similar reasons is time. I think we get half a day a month to be able to contribute to a charity or voluntary cause of our choice. And that has really given me and others in the company the opportunity to take on leadership positions elsewhere that I might not have been able to like nurture those skills. And I think just that, like, being able to give someone the space and encourage them to go away and test out their skills in another workplace setting can be a really, really great way to encourage that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jessie, and thank you all for all your answers and everything that you've shared today. I know that we've run over quite a bit, but I really appreciate you guys staying on. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and to everyone who attended as well. All the questions that didn't get answered will be answered in a blog post that we will do and send out to anyone who signed up and who attended today as well. And likewise, the recording will be available on demand straight away if you want to click the link again, or we will be sending out a recording later on today as well. But again, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great rest of your afternoon.